land of freedom, toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors, toils of the brave which have brought results. The star of Ghana, Nkrumah.
Regain Peace Corps autonomy or gain some independence for it. So that those of you who may remember having been at the 25th in Washington, it was almost a celebration of the fact.
Hello there, my name is Marion Morrison. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana. I was in Ghana 1, the very first group to go over to the field. And I was a teacher, a secondary school teacher in the town of Akrapong on the Aquapim Scarp. And it was a wonderful experience.
Robert Sherman, Ghana 1, 1961-1963, Pandu, Bishop Herman College.
I'm Tom Livingston, and I served in Ghana from 1961 to 63. We were the very first Peace Corps group ever. And I taught at Kanata Secondary School in Dodua, which is a pretty good-sized village not too far from Accra, which is the capital city of Ghana.
Paul Johnson. I served in Ghana from 1962 to 64, and I served in Pandu in the Volta region in eastern Ghana. I taught at a technical school, taught sheet metal work, auto mechanics.
I'm Susan Singh. I was in Ghana, West Africa, 63 to 65. I was in the capital city teaching French.
Okay, my name's Dorothy Soper, and I was Dorothy Brown when I was in the Peace Corps. And I served in Ghana from 1963 to 5, and I was a French teacher in a high school. I lived in a small town, a population about 10,000. The name of the town is Sankrangois. It's in the southwest, in the rainforest, about a 4-hour drive from Takoradi, which is the main port on the coast. In recent years, after raising a family and working and so forth, I really was very curious about my students and the school and the town, knowing something of the history of Ghana, its relative success as far as development and its return to democracy after military coups. So my husband was interested. He travels a lot, so he thought it would be fun. Our son had already been in the Peace Corps, so that was, of course, still a vibrant interest. So we went. I didn't have any contacts anymore. I just wrote a letter to the headmaster. I knew the school was still in operation. And I said, I'm coming, and I taught at this time, and if you know any people from that period, it's a small town, would you mind letting them know? So we just arrived one evening and checked into a motel. That was 2004.
And so the year in between, you're talking about how many years?
65 to 2004.
So almost 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we arrived. There were motels. There was a motel in town. That was new. And we checked in. We had dinner. We slept overnight. The next we had no car. We had hired a car to bring us, but he left. It was about a mile to the school, so we started just walking, which was fine. You know, we were happy enough. And within about 10 minutes, a nice white SUV pulled up, and it was the chief's car. And he said, I've come to give you a ride. It wasn't the chief, it was one of his family members. So word had spread, and I knew the chief, and I knew his wife. And surprisingly, and this is a marvelous story, still today, the chief and his wife in that town are the very same ones that I knew in 1963. The chief was placed in office in 1952 when Ghana was still a British colony. So he's about 85 now. And it's quite marvelous. I've seen him now several times. And his wife is younger. She's my age. And so she and I became great friends while I was there. And, you know, they remembered me, I remembered them. So the chief's in his car and the car took us up to the school, which is on a hill, little hill just outside of town. And there, the assistant headmaster was waiting for us because the headmaster was gone, but he had passed along the information. So we were very welcomed, and he began showing us around, and he said, Willie, you have to stay. We have an apartment for guests now at the school, which we didn't have before. So he said, oh, you have to stay here. So we did. We moved up there, which was great because that put us right on campus so we could see the comings and goings. And it's a fascinating situation, the school.
Everybody toils of the brave and the sweat.
You know, people greeted me on the street. I met one man who was a colleague of mine who was one of the Ghanaian teachers, and he's retired. The wonderful thing, I took back photo albums that I had made from my slides that I gave out to people. And that first trip, we were at the apartment, and so some girls came over to visit. And we had fun looking through because they knew some of the grown-ups that were pictured in my album as high school students. And the school looked a little different. I would say the school could use some extra paint here and there, but for the most part it looks fine. And they would say to me, tell us about the olden days. How was it? And that was their phrase. And
my name is Richard Strange. I was in Ghana from 1963 to 1966. As you can probably tell from my accent, I was a British volunteer, the Graduate Voluntary Service overseas. But I had many Peace Corps friends, and I've actually lived in the United States for the last 30 years, and I'm now a US citizen, so toying with the idea of perhaps joining the Peace Corps at last. I've in fact just returned from my first trip back to Ghana 2 days ago. I came back. I visited the school that I taught at Denu in the Volta region of Ghana, and it was a very interesting trip.
I'm George Coakley. I currently live in Annandale, Virginia, outside of Washington. I was a volunteer in Ghana in 1965-67, working as a geologist outside of Accra, the capital. My favorite Peace Corps story happened in Washington, D.C. I was in a taxi with a Ghanaian driver, and I spoke his language, which surprised him. The big old white guy was speaking his language. But he told me his greatest influence in life was a Peace Corps teacher. And when I got to the end of my ride, he wouldn't charge me. He said, the ride's on me. Thank you, Peace Corps, for helping my country.
Oh, I'm Dave Ripley, and I was in Ghana from 1965 till 1967. And I was a Peace Corps geologist working in the hills above the town of Kibi in the Burim area, near the Burim River. I did it almost on a lark. A Peace Corps volunteer came to our house at the University of Illinois to speak to a group of us. My roommate was the only one who had a vehicle. He picked her up, brought her. He had a test the next day. He asked me if I would drive her back, and in the drive back she discovered that I had studied geology. Her husband, who was on that same recruiting trip, was specifically looking for geologists for the country of Ghana. However, when I went back in 2006, I was 22 years old when I went over there. I don't know that any of my laborers were younger than I was. Many of them were 10, 15, 20 years older than I was. Maybe even 25 in a couple of instances. Headman was, certainly that. So when I went back, I had a picture book that had every picture I'd taken with my laborers. And so, I had numerous pictures. And I took that to the town of Sajumasi where most of my laborers lived. And I showed the picture book, and there were guys who would say, oh, that's my father. No, he's no longer living. Oh, that's my uncle. No, he's no longer living.
the sweat of their labors, toils of the brave.
Well, when somebody said, that's Kwasi Darkwa, I gather this one little kid just took off running for Kwasi's place and basically told Kwasi, this big tall white man is here. He says he knows you. And so, unknown to me, he was already coming to us. And I was being led by one of the townspeople to his place. And so my wife, I didn't know it, but my wife took a picture of when we came together. And it's pretty neat.
John Kennedy, I was a volunteer in Ghana from 1965 to 68, and I taught in the village of Peki.
Now, any story or memory incident that comes to mind?
Well, I met a volunteer from the next group while I was there, and in our final year around Easter, we got married. So.
Okay, and that volunteer is?
My name is Fran Kennedy, and I was in Ghana teaching math at a secondary school in Kumasi from 1966 to 1968. Oh yeah, we went back recently in 2004, and we were given a homestay where they put us on my school grounds with the headmaster, who had been a student when I had been there 45 years before.
Richard McCullough. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana from 1966 to 1968. My job was teaching, of all things, French language in a boarding school in Takoradi, Ghana, in the western part of Ghana.
Dottie Milligan Lewis, and I served in Ghana from January of 1967 to June of 1969. And I served in Kamenda, a little village with a teacher training college, and I taught English and math. The only thing I'd like to say is that at the end of my career, after many, many years in higher education administration, I decided the Peace Corps experience was so wonderful, I wanted another international experience. So I've spent the last 6.5 years in the Middle East, still considering it people to people, and that's what's important.
Martin Limbird. I was in the Ghana 8 group that served in West Africa and Ghana, January 1967 to June of 1968.
And all who fought for freedom. Everybody!
I think the most interesting part of my experience was what I did with my Peace Corps experience. My whole career has been in international education as an administrator at universities in the U.S., and I've kept alive my language interests, and the Peace Corps was a seminal experience for me.
My name is Myra Janis. I was in the Peace Corps in Ghana from 1968 to 1970. Another quick memory is teaching in a classroom, and all of a sudden my students running out of the classroom, and I had no idea what was going on, and there was a poisonous snake out in the tree outside. That's why they had run, and I didn't have a clue.
Which have brought results.